Good morning and welcome to Meet a Missioner Monday. My name is Jeppy Rivera and I will be your host today. Karen, our regular host, is working the polls as an election judge. Thank you, Karen. Please take the time to make sure your voice is heard and vote. If you are new to Meet a Missioner Monday, welcome. We are so happy to have you join us, and we hope that you learn something new. If you're interested in catching some of the older episodes with Karen as your host, please visit us at mklm.org, our YouTube channel, or on Facebook. Meet a Missioner Monday is our opportunity to check in with our brothers and sisters in mission around the world. And again, we thank you so much for joining us. Especially in this time of physical distancing, we want to draw ourselves closer to those that have been marginalized in the world. We also want to take a moment to think about those that are struggling during this time of pandemic and those that may have lost a loved one. Today, we're going to spend time with Margarita Duran and Lisa Sullivan. Lisa Sullivan is a returned missioner who worked in Bolivia and Venezuela. Margarita Duran is a missioner who began with Maryknoll Missioners in 2017 and is now in Brazil. Lisa, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, Jeppy. Good morning. Indeed, I'm a returned lay missioner. I worked for 20 years with Maryknoll, both in Venezuela. I'm not sure if can you hear me? I don't see it on live.
Yes, we can
okay,
hear you.
great. I raised my 3 children in mission, 3 years in Bolivia, and then 17 years in Venezuela. In which that time I worked mostly with community organizing, especially with a focus on youth and music ministry, lay leadership. So I had left Maryknoll, I guess that was 2005, but I continued to live in Venezuela. I've lived about 4 decades, 40 years in Latin America. So I'm just returned right now in Virginia, came for a visit from Venezuela. So I'm here with my family for a few months, and then I'll go back to Venezuela. Where we have a small farm and we do work with children with community gardening. So that's just a quick overview of who I am.
Wonderful. Margarita, if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Well, as Jeppy said, I joined Maryknoll in 2017 and arrived here in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2018. And ever since, I've explored a various amounts of ministry opportunities, everything from prison ministry, education ministry, pastoral ministry, etc. But I currently have stuck with education ministry with children. I've done some work with women's health as well, prison ministry, as I mentioned, and some community ministry organizing and different art activities, physical education, and things along those lines. So I'm going up to 3 years, coming up on 3 years here in Brazil, and look forward to continuing my experience here. My contract is soon to be determined whether or not I will continue or conclude. So I'm on the verge of making that decision, but so far it's been a great experience, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy to hear that. As Lisa and Margarita share more about their experience in Venezuela and Brazil, if anyone has any questions, if you can please share those in the chat box, that would be wonderful. Lisa, if you can share a little bit about the photos we have.
Okay, great. I'm just waiting to see the photo come up. Okay, this is a photo in our little farm, which has become kind of a community farm. As many of you may know, Venezuela is going through an extreme economic crisis, which is very complex, has a lot to do with internal mismanagement, has a lot to do with external sanctions on the part of the US government as well. But that meant that Venezuela plummeted from about maybe a 10 to 20% poverty rate to, I think now they consider it a 96 poverty rate. Food is extremely hard to find and to buy, and so is the rest of life. It's a very difficult time. Services, gasoline, cooking gas, you name it, electricity, internet. I wouldn't be able to do this video at all from Venezuela, so because of those limitations. But this is a picture of a group of kids, my neighbors, who one of them, who's in the middle, I'll show another picture of her in a minute, Fabi, came to me a few years ago when she was 9 years old, as her parents were in food lines, and said, "Hey, Lisa, why don't we use some of your land and grow some things together?" So that spawned a really wonderful experience going on now 4 years of kids working together, turning into becoming teens and growing food together, helping other kids grow food. So that's this photo here. I'm not sure, maybe the next slide is of Fabiola. I don't know if you want to move that forward. Oh, this is actually there we go, Fabiola. She's the one who just has a lot of spunk. And again, her parents, they're day laborers on the farms, but these days wages are less than $1 a day, which leads to another whole issue I'll talk about in a minute as well, about the issue of migration, which I know has been a theme of this interview. But just to say, Fabi was the one who came to my door and she said, you've got the land, I'll bring some sheep manure and I'll bring some seeds and maybe we can start. So the day she's visiting me here is when she graduated from 6th grade. She was the first to graduate 6th grade in her family. So that's Fabiola, who's an inspiration. But if you want to go back just a minute, the slide, previous one, this is Mamari. This is actually her sister. But that's just to give you an indication of how we have to cook now. We used to be able to buy cooking gas in canisters, but because the whole Venezuelan gas industry, gasoline and gas has just imploded completely. There's really next to no gasoline for vehicles, nor is there cooking gas. And so what there is left goes to the city of Caracas. Caracas is the capital. It's become like a country within a country who has access to these resources, but those of us who live in the interior of the country really do not have it. So we have to collect wood and build fires to cook. So that's showing that. That slide, maybe the next one. This is a family, my back next door neighbors. And maybe I'll move into just briefly the issue of migration there. One of their, the brother, one of the young women here has left. He's in Peru. Right now, about 1/5 of Venezuela's population has left the country. That's about 5 million people. And it started being mostly people from the city, young people, but it's really, especially before the pandemic, just increased exponentially. About 80% of people who've left are in other Latin American countries. And I'm sure that, Margarita, I'm guessing she's met some Venezuelans. Many have gone to the bordering countries, which is Brazil, but mostly to Colombia. So yeah, 5 million people have left, and that has had a huge impact in many different ways on Venezuela. Venezuela now gets more money from its immigrants, its migrants, than it does from its oil industry. And so it's these people whose hard work is really sustaining the country right now. But we have a real lack of young people, especially young professionals, and people kind of giving up on the country. So it's a very difficult situation. Maybe you want to go to the next one. And this is Fabi's just showing what we can do with our hands, right? We plant something and we have abundant food. This is it's related to the banana. It's called topocho, which you actually cook. You can either boil it or sometimes we turn it into puree and turn it into arepas. Yeah. The next one is, okay, this might be the last one, but this shows the reason I shared this photo. These are my neighbors, Bebe and Yelimar, and their little girl. They were visiting me that day on their horse, and which is another reality check. We've been thrust back in some ways 1,000 years that many people get around by horseback now. People either walk or get around by horseback because of the lack of gasoline, which is just a really strange situation given that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world under our feet. But the oil industry has so much completely fallen apart that we can't refine gasoline. And the US sanctions mean that we cannot import the chemicals that are needed to translate oil into gasoline. And the only country willing to sell was Iran. And so Iran did send some gasoline, but the US has tried to block those ships as well. So again, our reality outside of Caracas is extreme hardship, extreme lack of any kind of travel, and that's not even to mention the pandemic. But yeah, this is just kind of an overview. I don't know, maybe later Jeppy may have specific questions, but just a bit of an overview of our difficult situation there.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. If anyone has any questions for Lisa with regard to Venezuela and their migration and the situation occurring there now, please, if you would put them in the chat. Margarita, if you would share a little bit more about the photos you have, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Okay, so these first few photos I think are going to be pre-pandemic photos. This was taken late last year in one of the women's shelters that I was volunteering at. And this is a shelter that receives refugee women, immigrant women, or women who have just recently been released from prison. And here I gave activities with the children. I also did some fitness classes with the women, but my main focus was to spend time with the kids. And here in this photo, you'll see kids. Some of the kids are from Venezuela. Some of the kids here are from Angola. I worked with kids that were from Bolivia, from Peru. So it was a great variety of different countries, different nations that we all came together and did art activities or physical education activities. And the next one. And here, this is from last year's June festivities that happen here every year in Brazil. And I was invited to take part in a skirt dance with the little kids. And this is at one of the communities that I frequent called Community Haiti. And here it was on the day of the big party. And so I put on this big skirt and the little kids did their typical dance around it. It was so much fun. This year, unfortunately, we were not able to have these festivities due to the pandemic, but it was such a wonderful experience to have. So this is from June of 2019. And one of the projects that I have gotten myself involved in is building this mosaic mural. So this is in front of the community chapel at the same community where I did the skirt dance, Community Haiti. This is the community's chapel here, and our plan is to fill the entire building with this mosaic mural. And so this is the start, the start that is very, very rusty. We have a long, long way to go. But this is some of the first pieces that we were able to put up. And this was at the beginning of this year, right before the pandemic. And this is the team that I partake in at an immigrant integration center, as well as one of the center communities here in Sao Paulo. And these are all except for the women to my left hand side are all Holy Spirit sisters who coordinate the center. And so together we collaborate with different activities for immigrants, for local people as well. We do things as far as computer classes, cooking classes. They have different services such as therapy, encounters and reunions with psychologists and different types of workshops and things along those lines. My focus in particular was doing art and physical education courses with the kids there that participate at the center, as well as English courses too. And in the next photo in here, and this is during one of our, I think we were doing a physical education class this day, and we were doing an activity with toilet paper. But this is what my reunions with the kids would look like. This is at the immigration at the Center for Immigrant Integration. And this goes back to the mosaic mural, Community Haiti. This is what most of my ministry right now it currently consists of. It's just a continuation of working on the mural. This piece in particular is part of the name of the chapel, which is Our Lady of Grace, Nossa Senhora das Graças in Portuguese. And so here we're just working on finishing up this piece, and that's going to be the next part that we'll mount up on the wall. And this is just a closer look of what I look like working on these pieces in the meantime. And again, this is just a broader picture of what the outside of the chapel. So we plan on covering this entire wall. The other side will have an image of Our Lady of Grace, and the name will be over the window sill. And so we plan on covering this entire space and making it nice and colorful. Have it be something that's very vibrant and pop out in the community. So work in progress. A lot of work, but we're in it to win it. And currently, as well as the pandemic has unfortunately halted a lot of activities, I've partaken in a community garden that is solely based and dependent on volunteer maintenance and volunteers to keep the place alive, to keep it growing. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, this place came to a halt, and it had little to zero maintenance, and so a lot of the soil, dried up, and a lot of the plants and the food that was previously growing there dried up and just kind of became this little this big bush of just forest, just leaves, and a lot of cleaning up, a lot of maintenance to do. So myself, as well, along with some friends, some who are immigrants as well, and others local people, we've been cultivating the soil and been planting different things. Here in this space in particular, we've planted mandioca, known as yucca, or might also be known as cassava, I'm not too sure. But we've done various different amounts of fruits and vegetables that we've planted. And in the following picture, doing some cleaning up, some maintenance in that area. It just got full of brush and weeds and invasive plants that grew around the area. And these are some of the friends that have been collaborating with us. You'll see the Bolivian flag, you'll see the Huifala flag representing Mother Nature. It's very dear to the Bolivian people, and some local friends here from Sao Paulo. And here we were planting some corn. So this was just last week, and we finished cleaning up this area. And here we just put in some corn seeds that were actually brought over from friends from Bolivia. So hopefully we'll have some traditional. I believe this was purple corn, native to Bolivia. So we're trying to see how that's going to turn out here, but we've got high hopes. And the neat thing about this project as well is that all the proceeds are up for grabs or up for donation. So we're looking forward to taking the food grown, the fresh food grown, to take to families in need, to communities in need. For so many people have really struggled with food, and many families that have gone hungry, especially during this time. So we're hoping to make a contribution in that way as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Margarita. We have a question from our audience for Lisa. Susan Negley, who is also a Maryknoll missioner, asked Lisa, when I was in Sudan during the war, the churches were a great source of hope and assistance for both IDPs and refugees. What are the churches in Venezuela doing at this time?
Well, first, hi to Susan, my classmate, 1984, lay mission classmate. That's a great question. The churches are trying very hard. It's a difficult reality in Venezuela. The churches have not been perhaps treated very well by the current government, and so it's not easy. But what's happened is a lot of the churches are doing food programs as well. Many of them are involved in soup kitchens, community kitchens. For all of this is so new. Venezuela was a country when I first arrived there in the 80s that received with open arms immigrants from all over the world. Starting in World War II, so many Europeans came. During the 80s and 90s, the dictatorships in South America and Central America, Venezuela received a huge amount of immigrants. It's always been open to Colombia next door, and all the difficulties there due to the drug war and the Plan Colombia, et cetera, the violence there, we've received Colombians. So we've just flipped the switch completely in Venezuela. We are now a nation of immigrants, of our people leaving. And so the church, both in Venezuela and on the border, I know there's some excellent programs on the Colombian border. Probably the best programs for immigrants are those run by the Catholic Church there. In general, for example, the Jesuit refugee service and other groups are really trying hard to take care of Venezuelan refugees. And now during the pandemic, there's the whole opposite. It's just going back and forth. As I said, 5 million Venezuelans had left as of before the pandemic. But once the pandemic began to hit, especially the Latin American countries where Venezuelan migrants were, many of them tried to return to Venezuela where they knew that the crisis was terrible, yet they had a home. And so some of them have started returning through the border. The Venezuelan government detains them, puts them in camps. And so because of that, they're trying to go over the border illegally. We have a whole illegal border situation similar to the US, where they go over what's called las trochas, and they have to pay people to take them over, mostly from paramilitary groups or other illegal kind of groups operating between Colombia and Venezuela. So the church, both the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church as well, have tried really to do direct help to Venezuelan migrants, both within Venezuela and on the border.
Thank you for sharing, Lisa. We have another question from Winnie Victor, who was fortunate enough to work with Lisa. Her question is for Margarita. Margarita, do you get any pushback, obstacles from local politicians or government representatives since you are effectively empowering the community? What are some of your biggest challenges?
Thank you, Jeppy. So I think one of the biggest challenges, especially looking at the immigrant case, is there's a lot of need. There's a lot more need for help. The people here in the government have issued emergency relief for most families, but unfortunately, I mean, Sao Paulo is one of the, if not the city that most receives immigrants and people from outside, and especially most recently, a lot from Venezuela as well. And the documentation process here in the city of Sao Paulo is very time consuming, very bureaucratic. And so unfortunately, without the proper documentation, a lot of immigrants and a lot of people have not been able to get the emergency funds necessary, for basic needs. So that with that comes issues of hunger and availability for employment and things along those lines. Um, but I would say that the immigrant population is one of the most suffering, especially during this time. And unfortunately, there hasn't been the ideal support from the government that we would hope for.
Thank you so much for sharing, Margarita. Winnie Victor also has a question for you, Lisa. She says that she's always in awe of your dedication and your passion and the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that you lavish on the community. Her question is, what can we here in the States do to help assist with changing some of the situation in Venezuela? Basically, how can we help?
Well, thank you, Winnie. We worked together in Venezuela and you shed blood, sweat, and tears for your own community. You're an incredible community activist. But always a great question. What can we do from the US? Well, there's two key things that really impact Venezuela from the US. One is the extreme economic sanctions that have been put on Venezuela. Even though sanctions were started under President Obama, they became much more extreme under President Trump. That's why we're completely blocked off really from the rest of the world. We cannot trade really with any country, with the exception of some countries which are really trying to, get an unfavorable balance. And so it's led to extreme shortages. So these economic sanctions on the Venezuelan people have not been helpful. If anything, they have propped up the authoritarianism of the current government. They've helped it tremendously. They're being justified supposedly to topple that government, but the reality, it's been a help because all of our economic suffering is then being able to be blamed on the US government. And so I would ask US citizens to oppose economic sanctions that affect the Venezuelan people. The second issue is Venezuelans in the US. In spite of the fact that Venezuela is being used as a political ploy or political tool for perhaps both sides, the Venezuelans in the US do not have TPS, the temporary protected status. And although most Venezuelans have migrated to Latin America, there are, I think, about 400,000 here in the United States. And I think one of the two candidates has indicated he would give TPS to Venezuelans. So again, they have been forced to leave this country for extreme economic situations that have been just made extreme in part by US sanctions. And so I feel like the least that could be done would be to offer them TPS. And so those are two concrete things that I would ask of US citizens to help Venezuelans by doing that, oppose sanctions and support TPS status.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Margarita, for sharing what's going on with regard to migration in Venezuela and Brazil. If we can just close with you sharing what your hope is for your country, if we can just start with Lisa, perhaps what hopeful thoughts you have in terms of moving forward, and maybe even reflect on how the country has come together with regard to what's going on right now.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. And we have to hold on to hope. It's all we have in Venezuela. Our lives are extremely difficult on a day-to-day situation. We have at least 12 hours without electricity or internet, no cooking gas, no gasoline, extremely difficult to get food. And so the reality outside of Caracas is extremely difficult. So many families have left, members of families. And yet what that does, I think, typical of any crisis, is makes us be extremely both creative and extremely communal. And so we've had to look to each other. And so there are a lot of small, but, large in the sense of how many there are initiatives. For example, in Venezuela, I don't think I've seen cash in over a year. And so everything that we, quote, buy is bordered. So we may trade a bunch of bananas, for some beans, or people offer to, do something they know to help somebody else. But so it's been interesting to see how that shifts what an economy really is. It's been fascinating to see how many people are growing food in whatever area you have. And so I think it's a model, for the world today with the pandemic. There's been shortages in the US as well. And so to see what we can do, what resources we have when we come together, be it growing food or alternative energy, realizing how much we can walk or run or ride a horse, So it's pretty extraordinary, I think, to witness this, to be part of it. Yeah, it's, our hope is that things change, that there really be a change from Venezuela by Venezuelans, but that be a participative vote that really is participative and not controlled, neither controlled, by an authoritarian government nor controlled by US or outside countries. And so that light seems very dim right now, that kind of sweeping change. We can still hope for it. We definitely hope that there's not outside intervention. We definitely hope that there's not violence, and continue to just kind of breathe life into absolutely any local creative initiative that we see.
Thank you. Margarita, if you can share perhaps a bit of hope and what you've seen in terms of the country coming together.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So similar to Venezuela, it's a difficult situation, and we've been forced to jump onto the creative train, and people have looked at different ways to continue on to move forward, from completely shifting career paths, some to coming to a complete stop and having to adapt to completely new lifestyles and ways of living. But I think that one of the things that mostly, keeps myself going in ministry and really builds up that sense of hope is working with the kids and the youth and the children, who just maintain such an optimistic attitude about the whole situation. And recently at Community Haiti, I was talking with the kids and asking them what they wanted to do when they grow up, what kind of jobs they wanted to take on, and various answers such as professors or veterinarians, mechanic, and they started just talking about their hopes and their dreams and their goals in life, and it's those kinds of daily conversations and interactions that really fortify that sense of hope within the communities, within the area, and gets you thinking that, what, life goes on and we got to go on with it, right? But it's definitely been a struggle for a lot of people. It hasn't been an easy road, but we, like they do in Venezuela, as Lisa said, we have each other, and together is really where most of our strength is coming from, and working in unity and community, and looking to each other to support and to move forward with the situation. But slowly but surely, I think also the hope is rebuilding back within the people in the communities here, and there has been a bit more of a stable curve. I guess it hasn't grown as much as it was. So people are slowly but surely coming back out, and rebuilding that hope within themselves and their families and their homes. And so that's also another thing that is, I think, is going to be great for most people, and for the work that we all do together in our ministries.
Thank you so much, Margarita. Thank you both for sharing how, the children in your communities have helped to empower the community, and how your communities are working together at this time, as well as sharing your messages of hope. I believe that it's important that, we keep the communities that Lisa and Margarita serve in prayer. And I want to thank you again both for sharing on this Meet a Missioner Monday. I also want to thank our audience for joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, in 2 weeks, we will continue the conversation about migration, and Karen, your regular host, will be returning. We will speak to Coralice Salvador, who is our Maryknoll lay missioner at the US-Mexico border. You will also be joined by Larry Parr, who is in El Salvador, and we will continue the conversation and the discussion about migration. Thank you again for always joining us. Should you wish to support the work of Maryknoll lay missioners, please visit mklm.org and click the donate button on the right. Also, please be safe, be well, and peace be with you.